Good afternoon, comrades. My name is Busiso Tlaba. I'm a national chairperson of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania. And we are here being hosted by the Ngwane National Liberatory Congress, particularly its unique president. Can you just come in and open for us before we then hand over to our guests for today?
Asosele leadership, comrade national chairperson of the PAC, and our guest and our political educator for today, comrade Lunga Mantashe. Sivusele namaqabane onke lamanye lakhona laphumelele la kule skola sanamuhla, comrade, for capacitating in the right tool of political analysis. Would see how are we going to treat the political situations in the country, because we cannot treat it by emotions, but we need logical thinking and the right tool. Let's analyze well, so that the interest of the masses at the end must be served. Since a political party is just a tool to exercise power, as one said by the national chairperson of PAC. Comrade, we can begin. Thank you so much, comrade.
Comrade Mantashe is the deputy president of the PAC, a well-grounded cadre of our movement, who has gone through the structures of the youth. He's still a youth as well in age, but he's a senior leader of the PAC, the second highest office that we have as the PAC. We are quite proud to have him in this school to share on the tools of political analysis, correct tools of political analysis. Over to you, Comrade Mantashe. Just while the technical element is sorting itself out, let's just hold. Comrades are still coming in. As I was indicating today, we'll be looking at in a little bit of depth. We have touched the issue of political analysis, but it was at high level. And today we'll eat meat instead of eating the milk. When we were children, we still eat milk, and when we mature, we then eat the meat that needs to be chewed a little bit more. Over to you, Comrade Mantashe.
Chair, thank you very much. Let me first confirm that you can hear me very well, Comrade.
We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. Secondly, I must report that there is a problem of instability of my signal. Just recently, immediately when you said I must get on the floor, then another problem started happening. So please note that. I do also want to greet the comrades and say that it's a wonderful pleasure to be back again to talk to you. I do want us to have rather a conversation today. I don't want to have a monologue to speak longer before I get questions. I would like, Chair, with your permission, that I should be stopped at any point in time to clarify concepts, to clarify any explanations I'm giving. If maybe an example is needed in order to make a point clear, then I should be stopped by a show of hand or whatever other mechanism, or somebody can just jump in and say, hey, I have a question there, you just talked about this and that, please. Chair, let me first get your permission in terms of this process so that the Africanists here can also know that they are free to stop me any point in time. Chair?
DP, it's as per your leadership. Comrades, please, let's be interactive. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. So I was asked, Chair, you wanted me to deal with the concepts, the concept of dialectical materialism. I would assume that maybe you did touch a little bit on this concept, but I do want to review that again. I think there is no crime in doing so, and maybe that may enrich the discussion you may have had last week on this concept. So dialectical materialism, as you can see, these are two words, and both words must be properly defined. First, let's start with the word dialectical, and then we can deal with the word materialism. So if I can provide a very, very brief history, the idea of dialectics began a very long time ago, and the word dialectics actually meant to converse or have a conversation, a dialogue. And usually a dialogue has got more than one side. Usually a dialogue has a proposer and an opposer. Usually a dialogue, in a dialogue, people have got disagreements. And usually in dialogues, there are people who are on the side that agrees or on the side that disagrees. So the concept of dialectical is a concept of a relationship between opposites. A concept of opposites, that is to say, one side of the aisle standing for one idea and another side of the aisle standing for an opposite idea. So dialectics then, and if you can go back to the Socratic period, it was a way also of looking and finding the truth. In other words, for you and me to find the truth, we must have a dialogue. And the purpose of dialogue is not to debate, but it is to look at both sides of the thing that we are trying to understand and to uncover. This kind of thing happens every time genuine human beings have a conversation about something. They have opposing sides of the issue, and each of them is willing to give up the argument if one finds that there is a contradiction. And this gets me to the next point about the concept of dialectics. That dialectics refer to contradiction and change. In other words, when I say dialectics refer to contradiction and change, I mean the simple principle that there is a conflict. So dialectics imply a conflict within a thing. So, for example, in an egg turns into a chick, and a chick grows into becoming a chicken. And so, if you look at that egg, you are looking at something that has an opposite within itself. The chick that breaks the egg and becomes a living chicken at a later stage. So you are looking at something that is contradictory within itself. You are also looking for a second example is an example of a pregnant mother. So a pregnant mother is pregnant of another person within herself, and so you can also look at chromosome X, chromosome Y. These are processes, biological processes from a spermatological point of view that bring about a human being. And the human being goes through various contradictory stages. At one point, they were a zygote. At another, they are an embryo. And then at another, they are a fetus, and then a full human being. And then suddenly they are born. And then they die. So that's a contradiction of life. We are conceived, we are born, we grow, we die. And this is the interesting thing about dialectics. It is that dialectics teach us that life is a contradiction. Something, and usually one other way of putting it when you talk about dialectics is to say that something is and is not at the same time. Something is in the process of becoming something that it is not itself. And I can make other examples. If you put, for example, if you put water in the refrigerator and you put it on a deep freezer, it transforms into something else that is ice, and so on and so on. When you look at dialectics is a study of contradiction. It is also a study of change, things changing from one form to another. But it is also a study of motion, the movement of things. And so it's a very powerful concept of understanding dynamics and change. So there's a very important dialectical principle that I want to address here. And that principle is that everything is related to something else. Things are related to each other. If, for example, a gentleman is unemployed and then the gentleman turns into a criminal, then the gentleman goes to jail. Or if the person is employed, but they can't afford to pay rent because the taxi fees have gone up. And they've gone up because the fuel prices have gone up, because in Europe there is a war between Ukraine and the Russians. And therefore, Russians as oil producers and gas producers, prices are going up in the United States, prices are going up in Ukraine, prices are going up in Germany because Germany buys fuel from Russia. And so because we go and buy goods from the European Union here in South Africa, and you go buy goods in South Africa, and so on and so on. And so you can see how everything is related to each other. You are a student in a university, you don't have money to register because your parent is unemployed. And your parent is unemployed because the bourgeois companies are busy exploiting profits, because profits are not important, and profits are more important to them than creating jobs. So what is this principle? This is a principle of interrelatedness of things. And this is a principle of dialectics. Other people don't know how to change their situation because they don't understand the dialectical nature of politics and life. In an organization, you get into an organization, you are members of the same organization, but sometimes you don't agree, sometimes you fight, sometimes factions are formed within your organization. If you are a student of dialectics, you don't get surprised because you know that opposites coexist, positive and negative. Because the opposite of left is right, the opposite of up is down, the opposite of behind is forward, the opposite of cold is warm, and so on. So you are a student of dialectics. You don't look at things, you see things as moving, things as being in the process of change. I'm sorry, is there anyone who wants to jump in? And so we anyone coming in?
Not DP proceed, we just mute.
Okay, fantastic. So this is why, Chair, I believe sincerely that part of our slogans began from this dialectical nature of struggle. For example, we talked about the fact that in the PAC we say student wars are land wars, are labor wars, and labor wars are land wars. That is a dialectical slogan because this slogan connects education with workers, with land. You see, this is a dialectical slogan which is simplified to enable students from varsity to understand that their struggle is similar to the struggle of the mother at home who could not pay for their fees. That is a dialectical statement. It is equally true that in your own context, if you can't have a piece of land to be able to farm as a collective, members of the community, because the land belongs to the monarchy, the institution of the monarchy, that's a dialectical issue because that means that you are in constant conflict with the monarchy. So dialectics teach us that there is conflict in society, but it also teaches us But the reason why that conflict exists is because there are two sides of the coin. It does not mean dialectics is not necessarily, should not necessarily be seen to mean only that there are two sides of the thing. There could be more than two sides. There could be three sides to the thing, and that's why I know other people who are advanced, they think about what they call dialectics, which is the three sides of the story, rather than just one side of the story. So dialectics is that kind of thing. So let me see if I can summarize what I've said so far. I've said that, dialectics refers to contradiction and change. Contradiction means two opposites exist. And this is why the chair must have said last week, I don't know, but he must have said that the first law of dialectics is the unity of opposites, which is the kind of, and then you have, from the unity of opposites, you now have the conflict of these two. In other words, they are united. These opposites are united in one thing, you see. And then from that unity of opposites comes change. You see, what you now call, let me use the concepts that are usually used. The unity of opposites, they collide with each other. One is the thesis from those opposites. The other one is an antithesis or antithesis. And the other one is the synthesis. The synthesis is what comes out of the contradiction. So, for example, let me again use an example. Workers in the factory are fighting against low salaries. They go on a strike against the boss and against the bosses. What is happening there? Dialectics, contradiction, conflict, right? What happens after that? What happens after that? Either the workers get their salary increase or they do not get their salary increase. And either their salary increase is enough to change their economic situation or is not enough to change their economic situation. But the dialectics change, let me talk about change in dialectics. Change can either be qualitative or quantitative. Usually, change takes time. Qualitative change takes time. And qualitative time change is not, also varies, in degrees. In other words, there is a qualitative change that is fundamental in the sense that it alters, it changes the structure of society. And this is what happened, for example, in one sense, and I'm going to clarify myself here. When colonists came here and took the lands of African people, what happened is that when most of these African states got their independence, that could have been viewed as a qualitative change, because that political power that they received, they could use that power to transform their own societies, to change completely the structure of those economies. But then you have other instances where the change, even though it is qualitative, but the changes that happen are not very fundamental in a sense. In other words, if colonists were running a colonial society, after this colonial society, what do you have? You still have a neo-colonial society. So there is a jump, there is a qualitative leap from not having a right to go and vote, say in the South African case, from not having a right to free expression. And so, but if you look at your case dialectically as Swaziland, for instance, what you see is that in Swaziland you have had some kind of change that took place, but that change was not sufficient in the sense that you were denied liberties to form political organizations, to contest for an election, to freely criticize the monarchy, for example, and so on and so on. So what that means, you are locked in a contradiction. And the dialectical principle is applied, is in application at this point. So the other key issue then in terms of dialectics is that change is constant. In other words, change is constantly taking place as we speak. This is why dialectics always say that you cannot cross you cannot cross the same river twice. The same river cannot be crossed twice, precisely because there is a flow. So the river stream, the river stream is constantly moving, and by the time you want to cross the same river again, you can't cross it twice because the water has flowed already beyond the point. So dialectics teach us that idea that change is constant. Marx used to say the only thing that does not change is change itself. Change happens all the time. As I speak to you, for example, change is taking place somewhere. For example, I'm probably changing the way you think about something. And probably, your mother or your parent, is probably changing. Something is probably changing at home as we speak. So dialectics is a study of also change. It tells us that things are fluid. Things don't remain in the same place all the time. And this is actually a contradistinction to people like Aristotle, who used to say that objects can be at rest. Objects can never be at rest because even the universe is in motion. And I think this fact now, that this geographical fact that the Earth is rotating. It is orbiting the sun. In other words, there's a constant movement. So that's what dialectics is also about. And I've made examples also about the fact that even in organizations are constantly forced to adapt. Let me give you an example, an example, even a liberal example in some senses, but it's important for you to understand. You in South Africa, Chair, you remember we had companies like Nokia. Nokia was unable to change. And because Nokia was anti-dialectic or not dialectical in approach of business, then Nokia was overtaken by BlackBerry. And then BlackBerry itself died because it could not adapt. And that's the law of dialectics there in a business sense. And so the point is, change takes place all the time. If you don't understand change, you will always be backward in the way you understand the struggle itself. And that's why dialecticians are the best revolutionaries, because they are not studying a situation of their country rigidly, and they have an open mind. They are willing to consider various factors that affect changes in their country. And they are able to also understand why masses behave in a particular way. If you are a dialectician, you are able to study your own organization, and you are able to tell why your own organization is either changing or not changing or taking time to change. In the context, for example, of the monarchy, as a dialectician, you can be able to explain why the monarchy has been in place since the 60s, as it were. I think it was in the year 1973 even. So you are able to use dialectics as a tool, as a tool of analysis, of trying to understand why things are the way they are. For example, why is it, for example, that the monarchy has not been overthrown thus far? It's a combination of factors. It's not just only one factor. It's a combination of many, many factors. But one of those factors is culture. Human beings are always easy to lie to and to mislead by using culture, by appealing to culture. Sometimes it's religion. By appealing to religion, we know that the reasons why Christians were most successful in Africa was precisely because they were able to appeal to the human spirit of belief and faith, and they were able to use those things to further put African people in bondage. And so when you come to understand, dialectics, you don't just say, oh, it's culture, oh, it's religion. No, because then there is also economics, okay? Because on an economic front, and this is now a kind of a Marxist view, if you like, because Marx would tell you that the way that the production of capital works in any society affects the way people think. In other words, economics is more important in society from a Marxist perspective. And Marx himself was a dialectician who began from an economic premise that what he called the political economy in Das Kapital. So what Marx teaches is that economics is so important that it affects all levels of life. And you understand why Marx makes that point, because if you don't have money, right, which is money to go and buy a house, or money to go to school, money to do this and money to do that. If you don't have money, that means that you are economically alienated. You are separated from the means of production. You don't have land. You don't control factories. You don't control machines, computers. You don't control waters, rivers, forests, and so on. And because of that alienation, dialectically speaking, this is why you don't have money in the pocket. It's because you are separated, because the bourgeois is in charge of these things. So that's another way of looking at the dialectical issue. Remember, I said that another critical principle of dialectics is the interrelated nature of things, that things are interrelated. So in other words, one thing is not just related to another. More than 3 things or 4 things or 5 things are related to each other. Now you want to go to a mass meeting and talk to the members of the community. If you master the art of understanding dialectics, then you also master the ability to bring to the masses the relationship between their lives, the elements of their lives. What are these elements? The element of culture, the element of economics, the element of political apathy, the element of unemployment, the element of landlessness, the element of culture, tradition, and so on. You are able to bring them together to explain to them a united story of oppression. So revolutionaries must become dialecticians necessarily, because when you become a dialectician, you come to understand different forces that are at play at different times. You see, so that I think is a very, very important point to understand. I don't know if I could pause here a little bit and see if there are no particular questions, things that I need to clarify a little bit further, and so on.
Thank you, TP. Can we get a comment? Dialectic.
Materialism.
Yes, may we have a comment on what has been said so far? I think, DP, there is a lot of digestion, comrade, reflecting, but it's just important to note as the hand is coming up, to note the element of the continuous motion of things, and continuous assessment, and continuously reflecting on the truth that that was not well understood yesterday, that might be better understood today. Over to you, comrade. Your hand is up before DP comes in.
Danke, comrade, facilitator. Mine is not a question per se, but it's just a mere comment to say we appreciate the presentation so given on dialectical materialism. As the presenter was explaining in detail the concept of dialectics, I think what is coming into my mind is that being a dialectician is not a particular way of thinking or of looking at things. For me, it's more like a way of life. That is, if you are a revolutionary, it has to be a way of life. It has to be that which defines your each and every move, and actually your DNA as a progressive person, as a revolutionary. Once you divorce yourself, or once you relegate dialectics or the thinking with regards to dialectics to the background, it means as a revolutionary you are incomplete, and therefore you are lacking critical tools of analysis to look at each and every situation, paying particular attention to each and every detail, and then you will be lost. I think this is just an emphasis to say everything that there is to be seen on earth. Even if you may think that is not to be considered, but you must, as a dialectician, you must pay attention to each and every detail with the full understanding that there are those ongoing contradictions within and between the so many phenomena, and that the change which is there, the change that is occurring, some forces behind any change, they can be visible and some are not visible, but we know there's always a breaking point where there is an exemplification, or when those forces they are climaxing, where there is now a transition from one state or position to the next. I think it is just challenging us to think broadly on the concept. For me, comrade facilitator, that is my observation and comment. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. I mean, I appreciate your comment, and your comment actually makes me to be interested to say one point and ask another question from the comrades here. That true, as a dialectician revolutionary, your art of struggle must be dialectical. In other words, you are not a close-minded revolutionary who decided yesterday that I'm going to go on a strike, and you wake up tomorrow, nobody pitches on that strike, and you decide whether, and you decide that I'm no longer going to go on this strike, or I'm going to go on this strike, because there are many things that you need to consider. You need to consider, for example, and these things actually we do in real practice of struggle. You consider whether there will be police there, right? You consider whether these policemen are going to be violent or not, whether they are instructed to be violent. You consider what you read on the news about tomorrow. You consider this and that. So all these various elements come to produce an understanding of the dialectic. I wanted to give a second example about the dialectic. That if you become a true dialectician, you can't find one main cause for something. You can't say, for example, the main cause of the failure of the strike yesterday was this, because you think about not just one thing, but a couple of many things. If, for example, a man dies tomorrow in hospital and he had COVID, he was infected with COVID, the cause cannot simply be COVID because he had COVID. If, for example, it thunders and then it rains, it doesn't mean that it rained because there was thunder. So a dialectician is not excited about a main cause of something. A dialectician looks at the series of events and the series of elements that lead up to something. So I wanted to ask you a question, because I was going to give you an example about what happened in North Africa, in Tunisia, when we had a fellow called Bouazizi who burned himself alive. And he burned himself after he was removed from trading as a hawker in the street. He was a graduate who was unemployed. And then suddenly this gentleman was removed by the police, and then he burned himself alive. And then boom, there was an uprising in North Africa. It started in Tunisia, it went to Egypt, and then it went elsewhere, and then the West used that opportunity to overthrow Gaddafi in 2011. And so you can see this is a very crucial concept of struggle as an analytic tool, a tool you use to analyze situations. I wanted to ask you an important principle, because dialectics teaches us that sometimes the change that takes place, remember I told you that things change, the change that takes place sometimes in terms of the dialectic is usually sparked by something very small, not necessarily by something very big. Of course, sometimes big things, make things happen and make things or force things to change. But I wanted to ask you, so that you can reflect on this dialectical principle. How is it, or what why is it that when did it begin that you were now found in this situation? What happened? What were the series of events that played a role in you now being in the stage of the revolution that you are in? If you can just maybe remind me and remind yourself, because I want to extract this principle of dialectics from that example. I see the hand there. Sigalela, please go ahead.
Yes, no. Thanks, Comrade Mbe. A small contribution to the question that we have since posed. You see, in Swaziland, we have always had the progressive movement. You see, advocating for the transformation of the political system into a democratic one, inclusive one. You see, it's something that started several years ago.
Yeah.
You know, but then what happened? I think in the current parliament, there were those MPs who were then vocal in such a way that they started now addressing themselves to not to the actual demand that the people are currently making, but they were talking about something to that effect, to say, as a country, we are now sick and tired to have a person who is a head of government having been elected by a person. Now we need to elect our own prime minister, and that was the narrative, and it was escalated, and that is what that is not what the rest of the mass democratic movement was actually saying as an argument. No, we were not saying that. We were talking about an achievement or an attainment of a multi-party constitutional democracy where political parties are going to be allowed to contest in a free and fair election. And but in terms of the fabric of our democracy, we did not reach that level. But you see, these MPs, because these people are representative of the people from the constituencies, they go into parliament in individual merit, and upon reaching parliament, they are now discussing issues inside the chamber, because before that, it was unprecedented, you see, to hear a member of parliament calling for a major shift in terms of how things are done politically in the country, and actually going to the extent of even challenging the appointing authority. That is what these guys did.
I'm sorry. Okay, I want us to keep this conversation going. I want to ask you just a small question. When these MPs started, what do you think in your understanding and in your view, why were these MPs bold this time around?
Okay, there could be so many reasons, because as members of parliament, they are politicians in their own right. And now, if they are a politician representing the people from the grassroots, the people on the ground will require or will expect the delivery of services such as properly maintained roads, safe drinking water, and so many things. And because the government is broke, the MPs were making these requests time and again to the central government to say, please support us. We want to develop our constituencies by doing ABC. And the government was not able to do that. And then that was enough in actually boosting the confidence of these people to say, the reason why this government is unable to deliver, it is because the government that has not been elected by the people. And therefore, we want or we demand a prime minister that is going to be elected by the people. And that was the beginning of everything. Yes.
Now, I was gonna jump in and ask another question, and say, so I see that this is how the whole thing seems to have begun. So there's an interesting principle, that in politics there's what is called appearance and reality, and things appear in a certain way to the general public that these MPs want to do good for us as the members of society. And then we can extract a quick dialectical principle there that it is possible that these politicians are not necessarily calling for that. They are just frustrated because they don't know whether they are going to make it in the next term. And so this is their way of politicking within the status quo, not so much that they want to change it, they want to reform the electoral system. Or it is another possibility is that it could very well be that these MPs now suddenly think that if we want to be on the right side of things, let's stand with the people and let's have these things delivered. But I wanted to ask another question too. Once that had happened, what happened? Were they removed from parliament by force, or were they arrested? And then what happened thereafter? Very quickly.
Yes, true. Yeah, no, you know what? When the issue, the situation culminated into the political turmoil, the arrest warrants were prepared, and two of these MPs were apprehended by the state security organs, and one of them escaped the country to live in South Africa. And as we are speaking, they are languishing for that. Yes, I think on the first part of your last set of questions, I think yes, it might be possible to say they first raised these issues out of frustration, but their consistency then ensured that the matter further developed into something that was now more tangible and more decisive, into say, now we need a constitutional multi-party democracy, and that is where we agree as the rest of the mass democratic movement, and that is uniting us as the progressive force.
Yeah, and when you notice, and maybe anyone else can jump in, I'm not trying to trap you in a corner. And I see there's another comment here made by someone else, Makakula, who says that it could have been that, Swaziland's government was a catalyst of the revolution because of what it did, because of its reaction. Remember now, and this is a dialectical principle, when the opposing forces coexist, there's another thing to say that, opposite forces that cannot coexist forever. One must defeat the other at some point. And in one point, one force is going to defeat the other, and then at another point, another force is going to come back stronger or weaker. And that again is the principle of dialectics. It is that now when you go and educate the masses as a dialectician, you speak like a dialectician to the masses. In other words, you educate the masses about the different elements of the struggle at play, so that the masses must become careful of handing over their power to people like you who are revolutionary leaders, but that they must be careful because there are many things at play. Politicians can play them, culturalists may play them, and they may play it because they see their condition. And so revolutionary dialecticians always guard against elements of opportunism, even in the struggle. They constantly try to conscientize, to teach, to educate in the revolution itself. So the question I was trying to put to you, comrades, was now that you had come to be with other organizations, what are some of the dialectical issues that you've noticed there? Issues of contradictions, opposition. What kind of unity of opposites have you seen there? What is the dominant thinking in these multi-party organization and progressive movements that have come together?
Yeah, well, thanks. Maybe let me lead on this one. They are going to contribute, but those of us who are on the far end, I will say what is uniting us is the fact that we all need political change. We are all in agreement to say a political system that needs to be attained in this country is one which is at the strongest end of the political spectrum. And that is none other than a constitutional multi-party democracy. And we are united in as far as that is concerned. But you see,
okay. All right. Hold that, because I want to explain the principle there, the dialectical principle there. So the dialectical principle there that comrades must understand is that is an antithesis of this united progressive movement, right?
Okay, sure.
That it wants multi-party democracy, right? In other words, the conflict now is between forces that want multi-party democracy and forces of regression of the monarchy that want to keep the status quo. In other words, we're going to call the status quo the thesis, and we're going to call what you want as an antithesis. So what is going to be the synthesis there? The synthesis is going to be any outcome of this struggle, this conflict between yourselves and the monarchy. Okay, go. Yeah, keep going. I wanted to explain the principle, the dialectical principle there.
Oh yeah, no, thanks. I also wanted to go on and elaborate into saying, if you are talking about a constitutional multi-party democracy, you haven't yet reached an agreement into saying now, because in the country we have got a monarchy, are we talking about a political system wherein the monarchy is going to be a constitutional monarchy with parties existing and coexisting with the monarchy? That's one argument. Or we are talking about a total removal of the monarchy and its replacement by I will say a pure democracy, multi-party democracy, where you are going to be having a state president. And as far as that is concerned, I will say the mass democratic movement is not in agreement, because the belief is that at a particular point in time, then the people must decide in terms of what kind of a democracy that we need. Is it a constitutional one, or is it a one where the monarch is going to be a constitutional one, or one where there's not going to be an existence of the monarch? And I think leadership, it is then going to be important as revolutionaries to understand all the laws of dialectical materialism, probably, I mean, more especially when we're now talking about the negation of the negation and the relevance of the monarchy status quo. It is going to be very important. Drawing lessons from other political systems and occurrences, it is going to help us in this particular case. Thank you, Chief.
Yeah, I think this is a very critical point you make, and I would be very interested to find out what is it that you structurally do. And I'm going to take Africa Mabuza in a while. It would be interesting to find out also what is it that you do when you are with the masses about these contradictions, because Lenin teaches us that people learn more in the struggle itself than in the classroom when they are theorizing about struggle. In fact, Lenin would say that people, the chances of learning in the struggle are 100 times much more likely than if we are talking as we are talking right now. So in other words, it becomes critical in the moment of that revolution to try to sharpen the contradictions. And I'll give you this example of the Russian Bolshevik, Russian Revolution, because it's interesting. And I'll give you the example of South Africa because it's equally interesting. The Bolsheviki and the Menshevik party, the Bolshevik, which was the Lenin's party, knew that the Menshevik only wanted to occupy parliament and become part of the bourgeois system. And as you correctly put it, there are some forces within the progressive movement, dialectically, that that these forces, there is an opposition within an opposition that is united with itself. And that's why I said earlier, when you think about dialectics, don't think about merely two opposites. Think about opposition within opposition. Think about, some opposition, very much serious opposition, and some mild opposition. Because understanding how these things work out in that revolutionary struggle, understanding these issues is very, very important. So the Mensheviki and the Bolsheviki, so they won the first revolution, for example, in February 1917. But the real revolution took place in October, right, in 2017, when the Bolsheviki now took over. In South Africa, it was quite the contrary. It was the PAC and the ANC and other political parties, and the ANC, became a dominant form of thinking in our struggle. And this was as a consequence of many factors, such as the media, such as other dialectical elements, such as how the National Party viewed the political opposition parties in South Africa, and it elected to choose the ANC as a prime party to negotiate with, and so on and so on. Now, why is this important? This is important because I'm asking you a question. What is the dominant thinking in the progressive movement? Because the ANC became a dominant thought, and the ANC thought of Freedom Charter became a dominant thought in South Africa. And so when they were going to negotiate, the dominant thought in the minds of the masses, because they were also desperate to get out of that situation, was the ANC thinking process. I'm hoping I'm making sense here, because what I'm getting at is to say, as revolutionary dialecticians, it is your utmost responsibility to sharpen contradictions so that the dominant thought in the progressive movement is not a reactionary thought. You must understand this as a theater of struggle, and you must not simply try to compete with the reactionary elements, but you must be seeking to educate the masses, and your forms of agitation must win you a dominant thought. So I wanted to also ask that question: which thought is more dominant? And you raised issues about the fact that you don't know whether the people want the monarchy to be. It has not been clearly defined whether the monarchy itself as an institution must go, or merely there must be constitutional democracy and the monarchy should remain as an honorary person, as in a British sense, for example, Queen Elizabeth. So these are important questions that you need to grapple with. I'll come to Comrade Mabuza. You wanted to make a point. You are free to comment on what I've talked about also. Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. If nguva kahle my leader, nangingahamba nawe kahle, uthi, in other words, what we must know is that there is nothing that happened by mistake in a society. Absolutely. I think nguva kahle, in the point of dialectician, there's nothing happened by mistake in a society, but everything that happened must be fully analyzed. All right, that's the point. Yeah. Then ngibonga comrade SG Snat uyibeka kahle indzaba yokuthi ifike kanjani where we are. Then my question is here now, comrade, because to be khuluma liqiniso, lama disagreements are playing a role in the way we view ukuthi, in my way I view that the delay of our freedom truly is in the party kokuthi what kind of a society lesifunako thina simaphansi, because others are advocating for a constitutional monarch, others are advocating for the republic, and now there's this confusion between the two. And uma ubuka part of the two, kukhona vele labathi bona laba bantu bembokodo, by they are part of the progressive forces, like kunabo Sivesincaba ngumfana embokodo wakhiwe bantu bembokodo, but part of bantu labathi bafuna ini a multi-party democracy. And this becomes a challenge because uthi is right the monarchy. Then there's this labathi bona we can't deal anything with the Nazar. Then my question is, as dialecticians, how can you analyze the issue of referendum? Because I
don't know whether I'm losing you alone here.
Is it ngati?
Am I losing you alone?
Yes, yes,
yes, wakala manje.
Yes, my question is Kenyano. As a political party, is it wise to go ukuthi ningaba semkhathini nithi nine ayistahamba neconstitutionally, istahamba nerepublic. Nithi lenzaba leyo as a tradition, on your point of view, is it wise ukuthi ungaba semkhathini nje ube sivuvu nje ukuthi hayi nakuthiwa ngalana ngihamba ngalana nakuthiwa ngalana ngihamba ngalana le issue referendum nalapho that point. That's my question le ngathi iyavuka my leader. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that is a very, very important question. What do you do in the midst of these dialectical complexities? What do you really do? And my answer to you is very complex, but also simple. The task of revolutionaries is to constantly agitate for a complete revolution. That's the first serious task of revolutionaries. It is not to mince their words. The second task of the revolutionaries is tactical. Tactically, the revolutionaries must study the mind of the masses. If I am asking you to study the mind of the masses, I'm asking you to study the psychology of the masses, because it is a serious dialectical element in struggle, the psychology of the masses. If, for example, the masses do not believe, the masses are still trapped in that cultural, traditional aspect, then your task is to educate them about the dangers and the backwardness of let me rephrase the point so that it makes better sense than it could otherwise do. Your task as the revolutionary is not to scold or to mock the beliefs of the masses. You understand? Your task is to find, and I make this principle, if you could understand this principle, then maybe you are going to appreciate my point. Your task is to navigate the psychology of the masses and speak within their own psychology. Speak the language that their psychology understands, but agitate for revolution. Let me give you an example of what I'm saying. You are saying as a revolutionary, I am not asking you to get rid of your culture and your tradition and your custom. I am asking you that any culture and tradition and custom that is oppressive is not worth the name. Besides, cultures change, because culture is a science. It responds to time. It responds to conditions. The conditions now are that if we get too static and get trapped in this culture is going to be used to exploit us, because those other people that oppress us do not necessarily value our culture. Nobody has a value of nobody, for example, values a culture of oppression. There's no king properly so called that can use culture to oppress anybody. Otherwise, that culture is wrong in the first place. So you kind of speak in the way that the masses, first of all, will understand you. So you don't come in the mass meeting during the height of the struggle and say culture is bad, tradition is bad, we must get rid of these superstitions. One fellow who teaches very well about this is Michael Stokely or Kwame Ture. Ture says to us, and Fanon also makes this point, that the tools, and this is a dialectical point, the tools of destroying the system are within the system itself. In other words, if it is religion that keeps people, trapped into an idea, you must use that religious element. You go and quote from the Bible those texts in the Bible that are liberatory to demonstrate to them that the issue is where it is. You see, if for example, it's in the cultural artifacts of the society. If, for example, within the kingdom, if, for example, that there are very important proverbs and texts that are very critical as instruments of revolution, if there are artistic forms, you use those artistic forms, those cultural forms, to propagate for revolution. The trick here, my dear Africanist, is to be a true dialectician. A true dialectician is not rigid. A true dialectician does not compromise, but is not rigid. And a true dialectician studies every element of the detail, particularly the masses that need to be transformed. Remember, at the end of the day, it is the consciousness of the masses that you want to successfully transform. You are not trying to win over the leadership of the progressive movement. You are trying to win the minds of the masses. To be able to win the minds of the masses, you have to be completely dialectical, speak their language, but elevate the understanding while speaking their language. If they like, they're religious, go to religious texts that talk about freedom. If they are cultural, for example, we know for a fact that kings don't own land. Land belongs to the people. The responsibility of kings, historically, is an administrative responsibility. It is not a responsibility of power. It is a responsibility of obligation. I'm hoping that this will make a little bit of sense. So all I am saying is, when you are in the struggle, I know that sometimes in a struggle, people stop and then there are speeches that are made. It is during these times of these speeches that you must employ your most eloquent comrades, employ your most articulate comrades that can arouse the spirit of the revolution and the spirit of the masses. You want to use the best possible comrades in the midst of the revolution to articulate and to sharpen the contradictions. And in other words, those are people that are going to say, we are not opposed to multi-party democracy. We want multi-party democracy, but we have an ideal beyond multi-party democracy, because nobody is going to sleep eating multi-party democracy. We want land. We want to have total control of that land, so on and so on. So you want articulate comrades who are going to take it beyond the level of understanding of the masses. I don't know if there was another hand that I might have missed. Chair, I don't know, you will also talk on the question of time. I see we are approaching past, and we have barely scratched the surface. We have not talked about materialism. We have stuck ourselves into this idea of dialectics, and I think it's important anyway. Yeah.
I think let's not go to materialism today. Let's complete it with good depth. Thabo, over to you.
Good evening, comrades. Thank you for allowing me to come through. Being my first day of this school, I've been hungry to get to understand what goes on in it. But I must say, from the question that Comrade Mafafa was attempting to respond to or was asking, it's not going to be something that's going to be like a walk in the park, insofar as appealing and conscientizing the masses, insofar as whether it's a republic or it's a constitutional monarch, because even as we are speaking as different political parties, we are speaking different languages. And there are those, obviously, who still want to appeal to the monarch to be seen to be not digressing or not departing from the values that it seeks to promote. And then there are those masses which are part of those political parties. And then the first thing that one wants to say is to say we need to build that conscious, we need to conscientize first and foremost the political parties, especially the leadership, to kind of say come to more like a consensus, which will not be easy, of course, because at some point people are going to feel the sense that this is us in terms of tradition and culture, where people cannot distinguish between a culture that is oppressive and repressive in nature and one that gives the oppressor more power to kind of play with the minds of the people. So even insofar as that is concerned itself, we still have a lot to do, because if you were to bring the political parties and bring them into one house right now and say, are we going for multi-party? I mean, in multi-party democracy, are we talking about one where the monarch is constitutional, or we're talking about a republic? obviously there's going to be some disagreements because of the, first and foremost, of the ideologies that the political parties, are espousing. And yet
Absolutely.
it's time to rethink even those political ideologies in terms of what is obtaining on the ground. And as we predict the future on the basis of now, where do we see ourselves? And that then will give us kind of a synthesis that's more like informed by the realities that are on the ground, so that we not just stick to political ideologies for the sake of being faithful to our political ideologies, but we need to be faithful to reality. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, you raise a very important point about, this point could be summarized as what it could be called ideologism. This idea of people looking at ideology as something that is fixed, and any ideology that is not dialectical is not worth the name. It is a dangerous ideology. I was making an example at the beginning here in the conversation with the chair and the president, and we're talking about the fact that sometimes you've got people who, the anarchists who hold a view that they want to abolish something. In a revolution, things are not abolished. You win a revolution. It is the masses themselves who shape what becomes the outcome of that revolution. But if you have clearly articulated that revolution to the masses cannot misunderstand where the revolution is going. Sobukwe used to say, our responsibility is to show the light and the masses will follow. You see, and so our responsibility as revolutionaries is to guide the thinking process. And it's not to guide the thinking process in a rigid way. It is to guide the thinking process in a scientific way, in a way that responds to the objective reality, to the objective facts. So in other words, the point I'm trying to make is that you, comrades, are not going to manufacture a republic. You can't manufacture a republic at the top of your head. What is the outcome of the revolution will always, whatever outcome you arrive at, is going to be a reflection of the consciousness of the masses. If the masses are conscious only to the extent of a constitutional monarchy, the leap you are going to make is multi-party democracy. And you should not beat yourselves up about the fact that the leap you've made is multi-party democracy. But once you get into multi-party democracy, you must know that there are dialectical issues that affect multi-party democracy. We in South Africa have an experience of a multi-party democracy, by the way. And we can share those experiences of how is multi-party democracy actually like in reality, and maybe at an appropriate time and not in today's session. All I'm trying to say is revolutionaries do not manufacture an outcome. In fact, when some of these great revolutionaries like Kwame Nkrumah, Robert Sobukwe, Ture, Michael Ture, Kwame Ture, Fanon, these revolutionaries did not manufacture, the outcome. They first did a scientific analysis of the state of affairs and said, what is the most liberatory outcome? In other words, when we arrived at Africanist socialist democracy in the PAC, we did not arrive at it by common sense. We arrived at it by saying that we are going to be Africanistic in orientation, meaning that the conditions of Africa give us an orientation and outlook of Africans. And this is how we're going to approach our struggle. We're not going to approach our struggle as if we were Vladimir Lenin or as if we were Karl Marx, because here we're dealing with the problem of a colonizer, and Karl Marx did not have to deal with the colonizer. But that does not mean that you negate that is still dialectics, because dialectics is not necessarily Karl Marx. So you are still applying the principles of dialectics to do what Fanon said was to stretch Marxism. Because in Africa, you don't begin merely with classes as the case is in the European context, You begin with a people with a history. And so when we were saying we're going to be Africanistic in orientation, socialist in content, and democratic in form, we were doing our analysis in the late 50s and early 60s, and we came to the scientific conclusion that the only liberatory ideology is Africanism. And then we said Africanist socialist democratic order. Now, you can't complete that project by only going to a protest. There must be time for debates, time for robust debates, and there must be time for disagreements internally. And these disagreements must not be seen merely as disagreements of persons. They must be seen as disagreements of ideas, a dialectical engagement to get to the right ideas. And this is why it may be useful to go to someone like Mao Zedong when he talks about the importance of being self-critical, and of being self-critical means as an organization, you don't take it for granted that you are right. You become self-critical. You constantly critique your own ideas so that you become purer and purer in the struggle. So all I'm saying is it's going to take a lot of discussion and debate. In other words, there's going to be a debate, there's going to be theorization, there's going to be practice, there's going to be theory, there's going to be practice, there's going to be practice, there's going to be theory. So it's not a chicken and an egg issue. It is a chicken and an egg. You see, you theorize as you engage in practice, and you engage in practice as you theorize, and you theorize in practice, not outside practice.
DP?
Yes.
Let's stop it here today.
Yeah.
We have a big meal and a big reflection on that note of theory. Comrade Dlamini, may you please just wrap up for us before the DP comes back to close finally. Comrade SG, can you just have the last comment before we then give back to the DP to close? Comrade Mafafa, can you close?
Yes, leadership. I don't know what is happening to our Secretary General, Comrade Sigelela. Maybe for this word, maybe we can say it's an issue of a network, Comrade. Thank you so much, Comrade DP, for such a presentation on the dialectics and how it is related to be revolutionary, which means the kamba kanye kanye. It is a right tool of analysis. Comrade, there are so many questions that can arise on that matter, but we can come to the point you would say a revolutionary no matter what the circumstances or the conditions. In dealing with the psychology of the
because
yes,
I don't know if anyone else can hear.
Continue, Comrade Mafafa. The DP will just come back just now.
Yes, leadership. Yes, leadership. I was saying it draws back to the point where would say our role as the youth is to challenge and articulate ideas to the masses. I think that is the only way we can win the psychology of the masses and conscientize them in this process, because truly speaking, comrade, there is a role that needs to be played, and the change happens by time. It's not an overnight thing, Freedom. I think the honor for our comrades and for our party, comrade. Thank you so much, leadership.
Thank you, DP. In closing.
Chair, I want to thank you for inviting me again and the comrades, and I want to wish comrades the best in the struggle. I don't want to say best of luck. There's no luck in struggle. Everything must be a result of struggle itself. If I can just summarize in brief, Chair, in a minute, I will say that today, comrades, we were trying to talk about dialectics, and what I did this dialectic is about contradiction, change, and motion. We could use dialectics to study organizations, to study people. Not one thing is the reason for change. There's a confluence, a coming together of many things. And therefore, it is the part of the dialectic to pay attention to detail, to elements, but most importantly, Chair, to look at so what usually is called change, the cause of change, means the dominant element, but change itself can begin.
We are now having a challenge of network. Please try again. Let's see if it will not come back better. Comrades, thank you very much. We basically looked at the DP, as he was highlighting, looked at dialectics as ever-changing environment that needs to be studied, that is embedded in contradictions, that needs to come into a new form in terms of a synthesis out of the thesis and antithesis contradicting and forming a new. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.